Age 33, same job, same people, same room, but something had shifted 3 months prior, quietly, without announcement, and the meetings that used to talk over them now waited for them to finish, the emails got answered faster, the invitation stopped needing a follow-up. Nothing external had changed, same clothes, same title, same salary. But the room was reading something different, something that hadn't been there before, something they couldn't name but everyone else was already responding to. They hadn't changed what they said, they had changed what they were willing to accept in silence, and apparently, the room had noticed before they did. If you want to understand exactly why this happens, hit that like button. Welcome to Unfiltered Adulthood, where we explore the quiet shifts that reshape us. Subscribe, and let's get back to the story. For years, the strategy was external. Better vocabulary, sharper answers, more confident posture, the studied pause before speaking, all of it assembled carefully, deliberately, from the outside in, the way you'd renovate a building by repainting the facade without touching the foundation. And the facade looked fine, it looked polished, it looked like someone who had figured something out. But the room wasn't reading the facade, the room never reads the facade, the room reads the frequency underneath it, the signal beneath the surface, the thing that no vocabulary class and no confidence workshop has ever been able to manufacture. 3 years of the external approach, 3 years of adjusted delivery and upgraded presentation. And the same people kept interrupting, the same emails kept going unanswered for 4 days, the same dynamic kept reasserting itself regardless of the new packaging it was being delivered inside. The meetings were the clearest data, 12 months of them, the same table, the same faces, a comment made, acknowledged briefly, then spoken over, then attributed to someone else 20 minutes later as if it had originated there. And each time the response was internal, a small contraction, a quiet absorption, a recalibration of the sentence to make it less likely to be dismissed next time. The recalibration never worked, that's the detail. Making themselves smaller didn't produce more room, it produced less, because the room was not responding to the content of what they said, it was responding to the energetic permission they were extending to be treated that way, and that permission was being issued continuously, fluently, without their awareness, in every small accommodation, every swallowed objection, every sentence softened to avoid friction. They were not being dismissed because of how they spoke. They were being dismissed because of what they had silently agreed to accept, and that agreement was older than this job, older than this room, built from something that had happened long before any of these people had entered their life. The thing that broke it open wasn't dramatic, it never is. A Tuesday afternoon, a meeting, a decision made about their work without their input, announced as final, the assumption clear that their response was not required, and something that had been quietly accumulating for 3 years reached a threshold, not loudly, not visibly, just internally, just precisely, just enough. They didn't say anything in that meeting. That's important, the shift didn't begin with a confrontation, didn't begin with a new sentence or a sharper delivery, it began with something that happened in the silence after the meeting ended, in the specific quality of stillness that followed, in the moment they sat with what had happened and did not, for the first time, immediately begin constructing reasons why it was acceptable. They just let it be what it was. Dismissive, unnecessary, a small but clear signal about how little space they were assumed to occupy, and instead of filing it away, instead of softening it, instead of finding the generous interpretation that made it easier to absorb, they let the unedited version stand. That night, no confrontation planned, no speech rehearsed, no strategy assembled. Just the quiet recognition that something had been running for years that they had been actively maintaining, that the dynamic wasn't being done to them, it was being done with their continuous, unconscious cooperation, and that the cooperation could stop without a single word being spoken to anyone. 11 days of sitting with that recognition, not acting on it, not announcing it, not performing a new version of themselves. Just holding it, letting it settle, letting the interior reorganize around a single quiet fact, they were no longer willing to issue the permission. The room didn't know yet, the room never knows before the shift completes, but something had already changed, irrevocably, in the only place that was ever going to matter. The change didn't look like confidence, that's the first thing to understand. It didn't look like assertiveness, didn't look like a new communication style, didn't look like anything that could be identified, named, or replicated from the outside. It looked, to anyone watching, like almost nothing at all, just a person sitting slightly differently in the same chair, speaking at the same volume, using largely the same words. What had changed was not the output. It was the internal condition the output was coming from, the ground it was standing on, the silent baseline from which every word and every silence was now being issued, and that ground, for the first time, was not organized around the question of whether the room was going to approve. The first meeting after the shift, 3 people present, the same 3 who had been speaking over them for the better part of 2 years. A point made, clearly, without the usual softening, without the preemptive apology built into the sentence structure, without the slight upward inflection that turned every statement into a question seeking permission, and the room paused, briefly, just a beat, just enough, and then responded as if the point had weight. It did have weight, it had always had weight. The difference was that it was no longer being delivered with an apology attached, no longer arriving pre-discounted, no longer packaged in a way that invited dismissal by signaling that dismissal would be tolerated. No confrontation had occurred, no relationship had been addressed, no conversation about dynamics had taken place. The only thing that had changed was the internal permission structure, the silent agreement that had been running underneath every interaction for years, and its withdrawal had been communicated through no channel that could be pointed to, identified, or argued with. The room had simply received a different signal, and responded to it accordingly. This is not a story about transformation. The old patterns still surface, not gone, not resolved, not permanently overridden. There are still meetings where the familiar contraction arrives, still moments where the instinct to soften, to accommodate, to make the sentence easier to dismiss reasserts itself with the full weight of decades behind it. The difference is the awareness of what's happening when it does, the recognition, in real time, of the permission being considered, the choice visible now where before there was only reflex. And that visibility, that half-second of actual choice, changes the outcome often enough to matter. Some relationships restructured, not dramatically, not through confrontation, just through the quiet withdrawal of the cooperation that had been holding a particular dynamic in place, and the dynamic, deprived of one of its 2 participants, could not sustain itself, contracted, became smaller and more honest simultaneously. Some people left. Not dramatically, just gradually, the way people leave when the version of you they needed is no longer reliably available, and their leaving was not comfortable, but it was informative, clarifying, a form of data about what the relationship had actually been built on. The room doesn't respond to what you say, it never has, it never will. It responds to what you silently communicate about what you're willing to accept, and that communication is continuous, fluent, and entirely outside the reach of any script, strategy, or performance. The shift that changes how people treat you is not a technique, it is a genuine interior reorganization, and it cannot be faked, cannot be performed, cannot be manufactured from the outside in. Which is why 3 years of external renovation produced nothing, and 11 days of internal stillness produced everything. The room was never the problem, it was always just a mirror, and mirrors only show you what you're already holding.